What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Comic Talk, and here we are with once again with the great, legendary, even Mike Carlin. Mr. Carlin, I want to thank you again for being with us again because it's always such a pleasure to see you.
No pressure, no pressure. It's good to be seen. I'm glad I can still be seen. I'm glad
But
people still want to see me.
yeah, but it's so last time we talked about what my main focus was sort of the death of Superman, which I think is sort of your um what do you want to call it, like a magnum opus. I think it's the thing like you're most kind of
It-
remembered for, maybe, is that
It's
was
the
that.
albatross that I will be talking about for the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah, but there's some stuff around that, sort of around that era, that it occurred to me would be really interesting. Now, remind me, would you started heading the Superman books about what year?
Well, I joined on issue 4 of Superman,
Mm.
and that was my first credit in the book,
Hmm.
and that was 1986
Okay, yeah, because that's
or
so.
1987 when the book came
Yeah,
out.
so that you were joined really early on in that sort of rebooted era, but
Yeah,
you weren't present necessarily for like the decisions that were being made to like do that, to like
nope.
yeah, because the idea was sort of, when you watch the classic movies with Christopher Reeve, where Clark Kent is this bumbling, he presents himself as sort of this bumbling idiot. That had gone on for a long time, and then sort of the decision was made that like he should start to present himself a little bit more seriously, and it's sort of more like what you would see if you grew up like I did, with the Dean Cain series and everything, where
Well,
he was,
don't
yeah,
forget the Dean Cain scene series was based on our comic books
yeah,
and our
absolutely,
version of the comics. What you also need to remember is that in the Adventures of Superman TV show in the 50s, Clark Kent was not a stumblebum.
mm,
He was not a total, screw up. And the Christopher Reeve thing, the only thing I don't like about those movies is that they made him such a mild-mannered doesn't mean, you know, clumsy idiot to me. If anything, the whole Clark Kent idea is that he's supposed to not be drawing attention to himself. And everything Clark Kent did in those movies drew attention to himself.
yeah.
Like even just putting his hand in an orange juicer and crushing it, and just how stupid he was. He'd be the laughing stock. Everyone would be pointing at him.
Yeah.
So we never liked that. And John Byrne obviously, you know, got rid of that. And DC was on board for that. And I was glad because when I came on as the editor, ultimately I feel like I became the real editor of the books when John left because John was the guy they hired to do it. John was a guy who at the time was the top of the whole comic book field. You can't even imagine how tippy top of a talent he was. And he had his finger on some pulse that you just had to acknowledge was was what was happening then. And then so when he left, that's when I felt like I became the editor. But I also agreed with most of the stuff he did. I think that the Clark Kent being competent was a great way to handle him. Otherwise, why would Lois Lane fall for him
Hmm.
if he was such a loser?
Well, that's actually what the main impetus for this, is that yes, and you're right, it varied. I would say I've seen some comics from the '70s where Clark Kent was a lot more competent and like that. So it did vary from time to time, but the big thing after you came on, the biggest thing, even bigger than the death of Superman, was the giant shift in the status quo, in that you were finally going to get Lois Lane and Clark Kent together. That they were going they were going to get together. He was going to reveal a secret identity to her, and that they would get married. And that is, I use this term again, status quo. There's people get used to a status quo. So for instance, Archie is never going to choose between Betty and Veronica. Bart Simpson and Charlie Brown will always be children. There's just things
Right.
that are just that way. And you guys made, and that was what it was with Superman. Was Superman is this guy who Lois Lane doesn't know, and she's always, well, whatever. And you guys made the decision, and I would love to hear. Obviously, that's why we're here, to hear more about it. But how you guys made the decision to say no, we're going to change that status quo completely. She's going to learn. She's going to date him, etc. Yeah.
Well, we wanted to change that status quo because it had been around for 50 plus years at that
Mm,
point. And that's a long time, and I mean, we're heading now into the second 50 after that.
mm,
But we were lucky that we had supervisors, Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz and Dick Giordano, who were on board with the idea.
mhm,
Otherwise, we couldn't have done it. And they were great about supporting what we were doing. Jeanette was a big fan of the way our comics were done, the Superman comics, by tying them together, having it be almost more about the Daily Planet, the denizens of the Daily Planet.
mhm,
We showed you more civilian characters than ever before, and it showed why Superman did what he did. These were the people he cared about. These were the people he was going to take care of. And it was really important to us that Lois Lane not seem as shallow as a person who would only go for a Superman.
mhm,
If Lois Lane would only fall for a man who could fly and bounce bullets off his chest and do everything, that makes her a weaker character, I think, and it
mhm.
puts her in a different, category. And again, that those years were they were long. We dealt with that situation for a long time, and it was really just time for a change. And thank God we had the crew at DC that backed it, and we were allowed to have her. It was very important for us also for her to fall for Clark eventually,
Mhm.
and not Superman. And then once she did fall for Clark, he felt confident enough to say, "I got to tell her the secret because you can't start a marriage with a lie."
Mhm.
He let her in on his story. And as far as her being an investigative reporter, she did say, "I kind of knew, I had a feeling," and rather than push it and expose him,
Mhm.
she did care enough about him and his situation that I like to think that she consciously didn't tell that story. And
Mhm.
she said that I'm not going to ride the tails of this story to get my Pulitzer. you know. And I think that it showed the both of them as having stronger character than just, oh, he's so dreamy. He's the strongest man in the world. And I think that that really just made Lois look stereotypical and weak. And
Yeah,
we were happy
absolutely.
to get away from that.
Yeah, so I wanna ask though, like, do you remember? And it's possible, it's very conceivable that you don't, honestly. But do you remember at all? Like, was it you, or was it a writer, or was it? So, do you remember who actually just broached that? Like, this should happen. The status quo should change.
Well, we had the ball rolling a certain way. We were going to have Clark propose, and she could have said no.
Hmm.
And that might have been what we were heading for. And Jerry Ordway said, "What if she said yes? What if she actually went for this?" And I said, "Okay, I got to make a phone call. I have to call, the bosses." And Jeanette was on board right away. And it was like it was not nothing that we did was a hard sell because it was our books were working. By that point, even if we weren't the top seller in the business, we were getting critical attention. And by the time we got to I guess it was the crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, which is when the engagement actually went together,
Hmm.
which was around Superman number 50.
Hmm.
Uh, she was everybody, Jeanette, Paul, and Dick, were they all on board for the ride, and I just needed their okay. And then once they said okay, then Roger Stern was brought in on the plan, and he was a part of it with Jerry and and I guess Dan Jurgens at that time was already involved in our mix. So we just had, you know, obviously my big trick was that I every single thing that was decided or written or drawn every week I would send a packet to the guys so they were all up to date every week. Every Saturday they would get a package from FedEx
Hmm.
that kept them all in the loop so that we would never ever have somebody saying, "Hey, where did this come from? What are you talking about? I was planning to do this." And it's like everybody knew what was going on all the time. And without NDAs, we just had a group of guys who knew that you weren't supposed to blab.
Yeah.
And thank God. I mean, it was before the internet anyway, but
Hmm.
still, we had situations at DC where there were leaks. They changed the whole Armageddon 2000 storyline because of a leak. And it's
Yeah.
like leaks ruin stories.
Yeah.
A leak on a Stephen King novel ruins the novel.
Yeah.
So this is a creative endeavor. This is not like you're not uncovering news or you're not a whistleblower.
Hmm.
You're a ruiner. You're a destructive force if you're leaking creative storylines and spoilers.
Yeah. Absolutely. I didn't never thought about that, but yeah, like with because you had four titles at the time, which was, I think, the first, maybe the only time that that's ever been done with a character is to have a single character to have four ongoing
Were we
titles.
up to, was Man of Steel in the mix already at that point by Crimson Kryptonite? Maybe.
You'd know better than I, but I think so.
I, I, there's fans who know better than both of us. I'm happy to say that we're in a current world where they're actually reprinting this stuff in omnibus form,
Yeah.
and it's really gratifying. It's really nice to see. I know that they're planning I believe it's out there, so hopefully I'm not ruining anything. They're planning an omnibus that goes between the Exile omnibus and the first Triangle number omnibus.
Yeah.
Uh, for next year or maybe the year after. Either way, it's like I'm just glad that people care about the stuff, and I'm glad that they're actually keeping it out there in order, so it's easy to know how to read these stories in the right order.
Well, it's interesting because you talked about the arc you wanted with Clark, which is where then and even before I read any of the comics of that age, again, I grew up watching Lois and Clark. I grew up with this idea in my head of this is what the arc is, which is that Clark loves Lois, but is afraid that if she finds out he's Superman before he knows she loves him, that he won't be confident that she loves him and not the Superman.
Exactly.
And I love that arc, and that's why I don't agree. So like when the Man of Steel movie came out in 13, Zack Snyder was kind of like, we've already done the Lois and Clark bit to death. Let's just have her know right away. And then when James Gunn took over, he's like, we've already done the Lois and Clark bit to death. Let's just have her know right away. And I kind of feel like they're both wrong. I don't think that has been seen on the big screen, that arc that you presented.
Right. I mean, I would like to see it, but there is a point where it's not really necessary.
Mm,
Because again, back when we did the story, it was 55 years old of Superman and Lois, and now
mm-hmm,
it's almost 90 years old. And it's
mm-hmm,
like there is a point where it just becomes rehash and retread, and we need to go to new places. And I think that's one of the things I liked about Man of Steel was that Lois actually, you see her investigating,
yeah.
finding it out.
Mm-hmm,
You see her go to Smallville and learn about this. So it shows that she's actually active in uncovering his secret identity. That I liked a lot. And in the current Superman movie, that
mm-hmm,
the scene where we see them, basically interview each other, it's like it really just shows that they they're not going to compromise their own journalistic you know uh, uh, jobs
mm-hmm,
for each other, and I think that that makes them a stronger couple because they're both kind of pigheaded that way.
mm-hmm,
And I think that shows them being a good match, and you find out by the end that they're coming around to that. So we see them early enough on in their relationship that I think it's kind of okay not to show the inner thoughts of she needs to like me for me and that kind of stuff. I mean, I do think that that's kind of either understood or not necessary to the story that they were telling.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
I'm glad that you like that story. I'm glad that we played that story, but it's also not, you got to remember they have one movie every 2 or 3 years, maybe if they're lucky to get a sequel. There's no guarantee that there's more of this coming,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So for us, we had 52 issues to fill a year, counting annuals. It's like we had a little more room to get to these things than they do. They kind of
Yeah.
have to do a little bit of a shortcut sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm understanding of that stuff. What I'm not understanding of is when they change characterization, and I don't care for that. I was very happy in the new Superman movie that Pa Kent was back to being moral center of what created a Superman.
Yes.
The super part comes from, and I don't even care. Everybody's mad that Jor-El and Lara are evil now. I don't care about that because their job was only to provide DNA. They provide Kryptonian DNA so that the super part of Superman exists. Ma and Pa Kent are the people who create the man part and make him a good, humanitarian and a guy who has values. And
Hmm.
in the Snyder stuff, not so much.
I couldn't possibly agree with you more. I do. I definitely have a very good friend. I mean, a lot of people agree with you, and I agree with you. But my friend, for him particularly, that gets under his skin, especially because
Me
he
too.
loves the casting so much of Kevin Costner. He thought that was such
Yeah, that
great
was great.
casting, and then they biffed the character like this, and he becomes Superman kind of in spite of the Kents instead
Well,
of
when I saw the trailer for that movie, I was like, all right, Kevin Costner.
yeah.
Right. He's being a good Pa Kent. And then when I saw the movie, I was like, whoa, he's not a good Pa Kent. He's being about the worst Pa Kent you could have.
Hmm.
Then I said, all right, even if you go that way, you know that Superman, Clark Kent, is going to disobey this instruction anyway. So why shouldn't saving his father have been the time he disobeyed? He should have saved Kevin Costner from that tornado
Hmm.
and then let them have tension for the rest of their lives if that's what they want.
Hmm.
Even though I still think that's against character, but at least it shows Clark standing up. By that time, he was a grown man. By that time, he should have said, "No, what? No, Dad, I gotta disagree with this routine. I'm saving you and the dog, and the squirrel."
Yes, that was a great part. Yeah, everyone loves that. Yeah.
Not everybody loves that. A lot of people
Oh,
think
really?
it's stupid. Yeah.
Oh, that's too
I
bad.
know. I think it's great. I think those little touches, it's like, all right, we've seen Superman get a cat out of a tree a million times.
Mm.
Now we see him save a squirrel from getting crushed, which
Yeah.
is way worse
Hmm.
than a tree problem.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to cover was that whole Lois and Clark dynamic that, we covered the death before, but that's kind of his life is finding the one and getting, married, and later writers even gave him a kid. And I love that they've continued to not toe a status quo, but I mean that series kind of ended in 2011 anyway, and then there's been about 100 reboots since. But at least until 2011, people continue to not toe a status quo again, but but continue to evolve the character. And I feel like that started with what you guys did, and I'm very.
Well, I think what we did that was missing from not just Superman comics, but from a lot of superhero comics
Hmm.
is the supporting cast.
Yes.
I think the supporting cast is important to every comic
Hmm.
with a superhero in it because that's why they do what they do. And to not have that touchstone, not just from the reader's point of view, but from the character's point of view, you definitely want to see why he does what he does. And for years now, comics have been superhero meets another superhero meets a supervillain, and there's nobody in between. And it's like it's a big mistake. And I don't read them regularly anymore, but I understand that the current Superman books are using a supporting cast. It
Hmm.
doesn't even have to be our supporting cast. It just needs to be, people like Bibbo and how Superman affects their lives is what it's all about.
Hmm.
And that's why when Superman does die in the death of Superman, the funeral for a friend matters because it's about Metropolis, it's about the world, but it's really about Bibbo and Lois and Mom Pa Kent and Perry White and everybody.
Yep.
And that's why I was happy to see in the new movie they had Ron Troop in there.
Hmm.
He didn't do anything, but he was in there.
They
I
had
don't know.
Steve
I
Lombard
actually
as
don't know why they
Andrew.
brought him into the spaceship with them.
Yeah. Well,
But
yeah.
and even what's his name? The sports guy, the sports
Steve Lombard. Yeah.
Steve Lombard was from before our time,
Hmm.
but he's exactly what you want there. You
Hmm.
want Cat Grant involved in these storylines because they are the regular people.
Hmm.
They are the accents. They're the flavoring. They're the jalapenos in the Mexican dinner that you're having. And it's like it just doesn't make sense to not show those people. You have a book like Justice League to show the superheroes interacting with other superheroes, but their regular title should be about them interacting with regular people.
Yeah.
The Justice League is like going to you know, the fireman's bar or the policeman's bar, and they all get to sit there and talk about their day with people who understand what they went through, but then they go home to their families.
Hmm.
So Justice League is where the firemen and policemen talk, and then they go home to their families. Because Lois Lane, no matter how cool she is, she doesn't know what it's like to punch an alien in the face on another planet. And Superman needs to talk to Martian Manhunter about that,
Yeah.
But then the rest of his day is I'm a guy who types stories for a living. I mean, that's another thing about Clark. It's like a way for him to compete with humans on a human level is with his brain and with his writing abilities. That's
Hmm.
the only place he can compete with us normally. He can't play football against us because he's better than us. He can't, race in a marathon with us because he's better than us. But he could be a shitty writer, and he's not. So that's where he built up something that was a good ability for a
Hmm.
human. And I think the Clark Kent character is important to him. And we used to do stories like when we had him expose Intergang in Metropolis. It was important to us because he was doing a superhero's job as a reporter. He was definitely, you know, uh, stopping the bad guy with his words.
Yeah.
And that was important to him to have that level of the playing field be leveled for him, I think.
Yeah.
He never
Absolutely.
did a story about that, but it was always the way I looked at it,
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
All right. Well, Mr. Carlin, I want to thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to see you, and just thanks for being with us here today and giving us that much more great insight into those days.
No problem. I hope it helps people. I hope people enjoy it. Definitely support these omnibuses. I know they're expensive, but they are a way to keep this material. It's 30 years old already, this material. In
Hmm.
print, I know it's sometimes fun to track down the floppies, and that can still happen. You can still do that if you want. But if you want to just sit and read the stories back to back to back to back, the way we wrote them, the omnibuses are the way to go. And they're putting in so much extra stuff in the backs of these things. I don't even know where the guys are getting everything. I know what little they get from me, but I don't know where they're getting all this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Absolutely. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and we look forward. I don't know who our next guest is going to be, but I have a few ideas. So we look forward for you to join us next time. And until then, I'm Ryan Murphy, and thanks for spending this time with us.
So long.